Hi everyone, and welcome to today's second biology lesson on ecology. Today's lesson is on pyramids of numbers and biomass. Again, like all the other biology lessons, if you haven't got a pen and some paper, please pause the video and go and find one now. Today's challenge is to describe how to draw a pyramid of numbers and a pyramid of biomass, and our aspire is to explain how energy is lost at each stage of a food chain. So today's starter is a quick recap from last lesson. So I'd like to know what a food chain is. And what does this food chain in the diagram on the right show? So I just want a little explanation as to what does this food chain show. So I'm going to give you 2 minutes, off you go. So hopefully you have written down that a food chain is showing a feeding relationship between one organism and the next, and that you may have written down that energy is what travels also through a food chain, and we move our way along each trophic level. As to the food chain that's in the diagram, the clover is the producer. If you remember from last lesson, a producer is something that makes its own food from the energy from the sun by the process of photosynthesis. And the clover is eaten by the snail is eaten by the thrush, and then the thrush is eaten by the sparrowhawk. So firstly today I'd like to introduce you to pyramid of numbers. A pyramid of numbers is basically showing you the population of each organism at each stage in a food chain. And we draw them as bars that are stacked on top of each other like a pyramid. And the wider the bar, the more organisms that particular bar represents. As always, the producer goes at the bottom, so it's the very first thing of the pyramid, and then whatever eats the producer goes next, and so that's the primary consumer, and then the secondary consumer, and then the tertiary consumer, and so on. So often a pyramid of numbers does not actually look like a pyramid at all. And that is usually because the producer is a very large plant, such as a tree. And obviously, you know, trees can be pretty large, and it could be that there are thousands and thousands of insects feeding off one of the trees. So if you look at this food chain here, the oak tree, one oak tree would feed thousands of insects. So if you look at the bar that is representing the oak tree, you can see that the bar just represents one. And then obviously it gets larger because that bar is representing that there are probably thousands of insects feeding on that one oak tree. And then the bar then just goes in slightly, but it's actually bigger than the oak tree because there's probably several woodpeckers that are actually feeding on the insects in this food chain. Okay, so a task for you now, guys. Using the description below, I would like you to sketch your own pyramid of numbers. So remember the word sketch, you don't necessarily need to use a ruler to be able to sketch something, but if you do want it to look neat and tidy, then please, by all means, use a ruler. So I would like you to look at this. One oak tree feeds 500 caterpillars. The 500 caterpillars are then eaten by 75 blue tits, which are then eaten by 5 sparrowhawks. So I would like you to sketch your own pyramid of numbers. I'm going to give you 4 minutes. Off you go. Okay guys, so hopefully then your pyramid of numbers looks something like the diagram on the right hand side. So you should have a small bar for representing one oak tree, and then 500 caterpillars are feeding off that one oak tree, so the bar's a little bit wider. And then 75 blue tits are then feeding off the caterpillars. So that would be a little bit smaller because you're going from 500 to 75. And then at the top, you've got 5 sparrowhawks that are eating the 75 blue tits. So if you just look at the oak tree, which is representing one at the bottom, and there's 5 for the sparrowhawk at the top. You can just see that the bar is just that little bit wider, representing the 5 sparrowhawks at the top. Okay guys, so now I'd like you to have a go at another pyramid of numbers. So again, using the description below, I'd like you to sketch your own pyramid of numbers. So 500 blades of grass are eaten by 10 rabbits. 100 fleas then feed on the 10 rabbits. So please then draw your own pyramid of numbers. Please sketch it. You've got 4 minutes. Off you go. Okay guys, so hopefully then your pyramid of numbers looks something like this diagram on the right. So the 500 blades of grass are eaten by 10 rabbits. So obviously the box for the rabbits should be considerably smaller than the 500 blades of grass, and then 100 fleas feed on the rabbit, so then the box should be larger again for your pyramid of numbers. Okay, so the next thing that I'd like to introduce to you is something called pyramid of biomass. So the biomass of something is basically the total dry mass of an organism once all of the water has been removed from it. So it's basically the total dry mass of any animal or plant species in any food chain or web. And if you look at the diagram, it shows an oak tree. So that bar representing the oak tree is the mass of the oak tree with all the water removed from it. And then the bar that's representing the caterpillar is the total dry mass of the caterpillar, again with all the water removed from it, and so on. So a pyramid of biomass shows basically the biomass at each trophic level rather than the population, so the number at each trophic level, like a pyramid of numbers represents. And if you look at the biomass, the bars for the biomass, it goes down and gets smaller from one trophic level to the next, just like the amount of energy does as you go through a food chain. So the top bar is always narrower than the bottom, and it literally looks more like a pyramid than what you see them for a pyramid of numbers. So a task for you now, guys. Using the pyramid of numbers on the left, I would like you to draw what you think the pyramid of biomass would look like for this pyramid of numbers. Again, just please sketch the pyramid of biomass. I am going to give you 3 minutes. Off you go. Okay guys, so hopefully your pyramid of biomass looks something like this. Remember, a pyramid of biomass always looks like a pyramid. So that's a general guide, and that's how you should generally draw them. So what I'd like to talk to you about now, guys, is how energy is transferred from one organism to the next in a food chain. Now, as you go along a food chain from one trophic level to the next, the amount of energy actually decreases. And we know that in a food chain, only around 10% of the energy is passed on from one organism to the next, so from one trophic level to the next. So the question then remains as to where does the rest of the energy, the other 90%, where does it go in the food chain? And the other 90% is actually used by the organism itself to actually basically survive. So some of it is used as heat energy. Some of it is used for life processes such as growth, movement, respiration. And then some of it also is excreted out of the organism as waste, such as feces, which is obviously commonly known as poo. So I have a question for you now. Knowing that only 10% of energy is transferred from one trophic level to the next, why do you think that any food chain are rarely longer than 6 trophic levels? So I'll say that again. Knowing what you know, that 10% of energy is only passed on from one trophic level to the next, why do you think that any food chain is rarely longer than 6 trophic levels? So I'm going to give you a couple of minutes to write down your ideas. Off you go. Okay, guys, so the reason why food chains are rarely longer than 6 trophic levels is because if only 10% of the biomass is passed from one trophic level to the next, the total amount becomes very small after only a few levels. So if there is 5 or 6 trophic levels, by the time you get to the end organism, the 6th organism, they will rarely get much energy at all from what they have ate. So now we'll move on to the quick quiz. So for each question, I would like you to give the correct answer from the options given. So question number 1, what is an omnivore? Is it A, an organism which eats only meat, B, an organism which eats meat and plants, or C, is it an organism which eats only plants? So can you write down for me then, please, either A, B, or C? I'll give you 10 seconds. Off you go. Okay, guys, you should have B. So an omnivore is an organism which eats meat and plants. So next question. What must be true about the bars on a pyramid of biomass? Is it A, they get smaller as you go up the pyramid, B, they must have a big bar at the top for parasites, or C, they must have a small bar at the bottom? So I want you to write me down A, B, or C. You have 10 seconds. Off you go. So you should have A, they get smaller as you go up the pyramid. Right, next question. How much energy is transferred from one trophic level to the next? Is it A, 100, B, 10, or C, 1%? So I'd like you to write down A, B, or C as your answer. 10 seconds, off you go. So hopefully you all have B, 10%. Okay, last question. Why are food chains usually no longer than 6 trophic levels? Is it A, because only 10% of energy is transferred, B, there are fewer prey than predators, or C, they all start with a producer? So I'd like you to write me down A, B, or C. You have 10 seconds, off you go. Okay, so hopefully you've all picked A, and that is because only 10% of energy is transferred from one trophic level to the next. So we've now come to the end of today's lesson, and as always, I would like you to copy down the summary notes for today's lesson, and I'll give you 5 minutes to do that. Again, as always, if you need any longer than 5 minutes, then please pause the video. So in today's lesson, we have learnt that a pyramid of numbers shows the population at each stage in a food chain. It is drawn as a bar chart with bars stacked on top of each other. We know the producer always goes at the bottom of the pyramid. Pyramid of numbers don't always have to be pyramid shaped. Biomass is the total dry mass of one animal or plant species in a food chain or web. Remember, that has all the water removed. Pyramids of biomass always gets narrower towards the top. They are always pyramid shaped. Biomass and energy is lost at each stage of a food chain. Only around 10% of the energy is passed on to the next trophic level, so 90% of energy is lost. And this energy is lost as waste products, heat energy, and lost during life processes such as movement. So I'm going to give you 5 minutes, off you go. So the last thing to do now, guys, is to go please and complete the Google quiz. As always, please make sure that you write your first name, your surname, and your science set. Please make sure you go through all of the questions and tick the relevant boxes. Please make sure that if it says to tick 3 boxes, that you tick 3 boxes and then submit your form at the end. Thank you. Bye.